Hi and welcome. I am Victor Gijsbers and I teach philosophy at Leiden University in the Netherlands. In this series of videos we're looking at David Lewis's book on the plurality of worlds. And in this particular video I want to talk about section 1.5, which is called Modal Realism at Work, Properties. So just to remind you, in this part of the book David Lewis is still trying to convince us that adopting possible worlds talk, that thinking about all things modal in terms of possible worlds is the way to go, right? And how he does that is he has these several sections, each of which uses possible worlds to analyze a particular topic that is of philosophical interest and tries to show that that analysis is so good or so natural or otherwise so, something we so much want that this gives us a reason, a defeasible reason, but nevertheless a good reason to adopt possible worlds talk. And so in this case it is properties. Let's read the first sentences of this section. We have frequent need in one connection or other to quantify over properties. If we believe in possible worlds and individuals, and if we believe in set theoretic constructions out of things we believe in, then we have entities suited to play the role of properties. The simplest plan is to take a property just as the set of all its instances. All of them, this and otherworldly alike. Thus the property of being a donkey comes out as the set of all donkeys, the donkeys of other worlds along with the donkeys of ours. So what Lewis is telling us here is that he has a way of understanding properties. That a property is, on his analysis, just a particular set of individuals, namely all those individuals in this world, but also in all the other possible worlds, those individuals that instantiate that property, right? So what is the property red? Well, it is just a set of all the red things, both the actual red things and the possible red things. What is the property of being a donkey? Well, it's just a set of all the donkeys, both the actual donkeys in this world and the possible donkeys in all the other possible worlds. In order to understand why Lewis says this, and in order to understand why he thinks this is a plausible and even an important philosophical proposal, I think we need a little bit of philosophical context. Because at first sight, and without any philosophical context, this looks pretty bizarre, right? If somebody tells you that being red is a set of things, or that being a donkey is a set of things, well, that sounds rather strange, right? And if somebody says that being red is being a member of the set of red things, you might want to reply that surely something is a member of the set of red things because it itself is red, right? It is in virtue of being red that you are a member of the set of red things. It's not the same thing to be red and to be a member of the set of red things. I mean, one of them clearly seems to be sort of explanatorily prior to the other. And so I think there's in a sense, a whole variety of questions you could put here, right? I mean, this seems a very unnatural claim. Just as unnatural as Lewis's claim further on in this section, that propositions are sets of possible worlds, right? That a proposition like, like Victor Gijsbers has a Nietzsche bust on his desk, there it's on the desk, that is a set of possible worlds, namely the set of all possible worlds where Victor Gijsbers has, or one of his counterparts, has a Nietzsche bust on his desk. And the reason that seems strange is that, propositions are supposed to be things that can be true or false, things that you can believe, affirm, know. Sets of possible worlds don't seem to be that, right? I mean, a set of possible worlds is just a bunch of things, or a set of bunches of things or something like that, but it doesn't seem to be the kind of entity that could be true. It doesn't seem to be the kind of entity that you could believe in. What does that even mean? So there's something, at the very least, kind of unnatural going on here. And in order to understand what it is that is going on, I think we need, as I said, a little bit of philosophical context. And I suspect, although Lewis doesn't make it very explicit, I suspect that the philosophical context here is the idea that any kind of entity that we want to adopt in our philosophy has to be given some kind of strict and in a sense formal identity conditions. Right? So this is an idea that comes mostly from Quine. Quine has this slogan, no entity without identity. No entity without identity. And so here's one of the things that Quine says, right? Quine says, okay, look, suppose that I have two sets, right? Set A and set B. If these are to be genuine entities, then there ought to be some kind of rule for whether they are the same entity or not. Well, there is a rule for sets. Two sets are the same set, so they're actually not two sets, but one set, just in case they have the same members. Right? If and only if they have the same members, then they are the same set. And so there seems to be a tendency here among philosophers in this Quinean tradition to believe that all legitimate entities ought to have that kind of identity criterion. So if somebody comes up with two propositions, that's kind of hard because propositions are supposed to be these abstract entities, so how do you come up with them? But okay, we can try to express them with sentences. So maybe somebody says, well, I don't know, somebody says that all donkeys are animals, and somebody else says that all animals similar to horses but not horses are animals. Okay, that, I don't know. This is not a very good example, maybe. Anyway, suppose somebody comes up with two propositions and we want to know whether they are the same proposition or not, then we need some kind of formal rule, right? And the idea is that, hey, here is a nice formal rule. The formal rule is that two propositions are the same proposition just in case, they are the same set of possible worlds. And that is supposed to work because any propositions where we would intuitively think that they are different are supposedly propositions where we can also intuitively come up with a possible world where only one of them holds, right? Where only one of them is true. That might legitimate this construction. Maybe. Right? I mean, that at least seems to be the kind of thinking that's going on here. And so the same with properties. What legitimates the claim that a property is a set of individuals in this and other possible worlds is the idea that this gives us a clear-cut identity criterion. Right? If I want to know whether property A and property B are the same, well, what I can't do is just look in this world whether they apply to the same things. Right? Because they might apply to the same things even if they're not different properties. Right? So, like, suppose that there's the property of being Victor Gijsbers, and there's the property of being the most good-looking philosopher in the Netherlands. Okay, those happen in this world to apply to one and only the same individual. But could have been different, right? I mean, if I had cut off my hair this morning, I would no longer be the most good-looking philosopher in the Netherlands. And so these properties can come apart. They're not the same property. And so Lewis's idea is that if we don't look only at the actual world, but at all the possible worlds, right, then we have enough information, so to speak, to claim that if two things are different properties, they also must apply to different sets. Right? They can't apply to just the same sets of individuals. There must be some individuals that have one of them and not the other. Now, to be honest, whether all of that makes any sense, I am kind of dubious about it. Right? I mean, it's even like the very thought, like this very way of reasoning itself seems to presuppose that we have a grasp of properties that is prior to the idea of a property being a set, right? Because we sort of seem to start out from the idea that there's a set of things that are in some way similar. Now, it's going to turn out that Lewis says, well, there's actually abundant properties and sparse properties. Like every set defines an abundant property because there's always the property of belonging to this set. And that's, any set sort of can be set equal to the property of belonging to that set. But there are also some special properties, the sparse properties. And these special properties are, and this is page 60, the sparse properties are another story. Sharing of them makes for qualitative similarity. They carve at the joints of nature, that is. Sort of they really show where like the real deep down metaphysical distinctions in nature, where they are. They are intrinsic. They are highly specific. The set of their instances are ipso facto not entirely miscellaneous. There are only just enough of them to characterize things completely and without redundancy. So that's the sparse properties, right? And in a sense, all the other properties, I would say, supervene on those. Well, it's really hard for me to see how we can have an understanding of sparse properties if properties just are sets, right? If properties just are sets, what makes one of those sets be, qualitative, the members of one set be qualitatively similar and members of the other set not? Right? I mean, how does that work? It seems that sort of underneath all of this, we need entities, like things that have properties, so that some of them are qualitatively similar and not, others not. And then when we have these sets, we can judge that some of them have members that are qualitatively similar and others do not have members that are qualitatively similar. And all of that seems to suggest that we are not really thinking of properties as those sets themselves. We are thinking of properties as something that, we can then collect in, that entities have, and then we can think about, sets of entities having those properties, and so on and so forth. I, for one, really can't see how Lewis's story is supposed to work, right? How the official story is supposed to yield the kind of thought or something like these sparse properties, these intrinsic properties, these similarity judgments. I can't see how it comes out of the official story. So here's something else we can say about this. This kind of identity criterion that Lewis is giving us here, it doesn't seem to be very useful, right? I mean, there can be genuine questions about whether two properties are or are not the same, right? There is a genuine question about whether the property of being hot is the same as the property of having high mean kinetic molecular energy, right? Being hot, having high mean kinetic molecular energy, molecular kinetic energy, whatever. That's a serious question. How do you find out about that? Well, you first think about exactly what you mean by hot, and maybe you mean kind of several different things, and so you want to disambiguate it a bit. And then at some point you're going to do a lot of empirical research, and you're going to find out whether, all the things that you stick a thermometer in share some physical property, right? Like high mean molecular kinetic energy. And it turns out that they do. Right, and so at some point we come to the conclusion that these two properties are the same. What you don't do is say, oh, well, let's take like all the trans world into like everything in the space of possible worlds that is hot and everything in the space of possible worlds that has high mean kinetic molecular energy and see whether they're precisely the same things. Right, and you can't do that. You can only make a judgment about those sets by first making a judgment about those properties. Right, so I mean, in order to really judge this, you would have to delve into this whole Quinean idea, right? And we can't do that here, and David Lewis doesn't do it for us. But there are a lot of questions here in David Lewis's approach, and it seems that you already need to buy into a lot of philosophical context before anything that happens in this section makes sense, and therefore, before anything in this section could convince you to adopt possible worlds talk. And that is maybe the kind of conclusion that I would like to reach here. So, given that context, a lot of the things that Lewis says make a lot of sense, right? So he does some work talking about why we need these possible worlds if we take this approach, how to deal with properties that, seem to be different and nevertheless have the same extension, like having 3 angles and having 3 sides when we are talking about these geometrical plane figures. And he comes up with this idea of structured properties, which is, kind of nice. It would probably do the formal job. And he spent some time talking about how his ideas fit in with other, ideas being bandied around in the analytic philosophy of his time, and for that matter, the analytic philosophy of today. Stories about universals, stories about tropes, all of that, interesting, but not sort of central to the story that like to the argument of the book at this point, right? I mean, Lewis is there sort of clarifying the relation of his thinking to that of other authors that are talking about things that are, not exactly the same maybe, but enough like it that he wants to clarify those relations. Okay, so that is what I wanted to say about section 1.5. And if you have been following these videos, then you will not be surprised to learn that sections 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, and 1.5, which were supposed to convince us that we need possible worlds, that we really want them, and that they are philosopher's paradise, you won't be surprised to learn that I have not really been convinced. But things might be different for you. And that's, I wanted to say, and that's fine, but you don't need me to say that that's fine, right? You know that that's fine. You know that you do not have to agree with me. Unless you want to arrive at the truth, of course, in which case you had better agree with me. So the rest of this chapter, sections 1.6 to 1.9, are going to delve into the content of Lewis's own theory of possible worlds. Right? What exactly are those worlds? He's going to talk about isolation, actuality, and so on and so forth. This is very important if we want to understand Lewis's picture, Lewis's vision of this realm of possible worlds and how we ought to think about it. And that's going to be the topic of our next video.